Um, so yeah, it's a real honor to be here with all of you. I recognize a lot of names here. Um, Great long-standing experts in the field. So I was invited, I think initially to speak about UBI, Universal Basic Income and LVT. Um, but I was more interested in this topic, which is getting experts to come and share talking points on how LVT and land rents could address the housing crisis. Because I've been working on promoting UBI in Canada for 3 years. We have an organization called UBI Works that has 100,000 followers and do a lot of digital activism. But in my research around UBI, all the most esteemed long-term advocates believe it should be ideally paid for through an LVT. They'll consider themselves paynists, not Georgists. So that kind of begun my research into LVT, and now it's hard to think about anything else. It seems like the underlying root issue that drives poverty and it is also kind of near to my heart because I see it also as a way to share in the gains of technology and automation, since land values are reflective of societal progress. And that's been something I've been studying a lot as well. So yeah, I put together this session to be a peer-to-peer session, meaning all of us can suggest talking points at this crucial time where housing prices around the world are going crazy, particularly here in Canada. Definitely seem to have reached the peak of a bubble and the beginning of its way down. And the title of this is Bring Your Talking Points, How LVT Can Solve the Housing Crisis. And I say talking points because I think to create a new generation of leaders who will promote LVT, maybe run for office on these things, people need things they can say that are credible, that reach everyday normal people, ideas that can spread. So the frame of this is talking points. So in a lean coffee style, I'm going to present, I want to share a board here that where any of us here can share a topic. Yeah, I want to share a way we can get organized. The UBI Works, my organization, but I put together this Google Jamboard. The thought was that we can each get 3 to 5 minutes. If we don't have a lot of submissions, we get less than that, and plus some Q&A for each one, and then go through it and learn from each other. And and mine is how paying rent for lands will reduce cost of living.
Well, Floyd, this is Ed. I'll be glad to start us off with something that I have focused on recently in my writings, and that is to emphasize that it makes no sense to tax depreciating assets, and that a house is a depreciating asset.
Okay.
If it makes sense to tax depreciating assets every year based on the depreciated value, then it makes sense that we should be taxing all depreciating assets: cars, refrigerators, lawnmowers, hair dryers, whatever. And that's such a ridiculous concept that how can we think that it makes sense for us to impose a tax burden on housing, which is next to food and maybe medical care, the most important personal asset that individuals can own. So that perhaps is a good starting point for some discussion from others. What do they think?
Great. I added that card. Anyone else?
I think that a lot of cities are searching for creative ways to address the housing crisis, and they've like they're playing the game of Battleship and they're just landing all over the place, but they haven't landed on the land value tax ship yet. They, we've got like the inclusionary zoning, affordable housing processes. There's all of these things people are putting in place, which are really just half measures or ways to try to do what land value tax ultimately does. And I'm not sure why we continue to try to do things that are that are less effective and less I would just say less effective. Like how do we convince people, how do we show people that you know what we're the policies that are, you know, politically acceptable are really just, you know, only halfway there, I guess.
Hmm.
How do we compare current like in vogue policies to land value tax in a way that, you know, demonstrates what land value tax is, I guess.
So what will be the talking point?
Um, I
I'm
guess,
imagining you're on stage and you're just 30 people in front of you who you're trying to convince them of this.
well,
What's the talking
I
point?
would pick a specific, yeah, I'd pick a specific policy. So I would guess just exclusionary zoning, you know, how that, you know, compares to land value tax. I would say inclusionary zoning, sorry.
All right. All right.
I'll add one point, and that is the obvious one that everyone Georgist talk about is shifting the municipal tax from buildings onto land exclusively, ignoring the improvements.
And you've run for office. You were premier of the Ontario Green Party. So
The leader of the provincial Green Party, yeah. So
yeah,
I
the leader of
talked
the Green
about
Party.
this. I talked, well, the whole thing of the Green Party is tax shifting. And that's what led me to Georgism, because everybody's a tax shifter, right? The right-wing parties want to shift taxes off of the rich onto the poor, and the left-wing parties want to shift taxes off the poor onto the rich, and then Greens want to shift taxes off of jobs and businesses and onto nature. So we're all tax shifters, and so I got the idea that I learned the idea from the Georgists that we shouldn't be, like Ed said, why are we taxing depreciating assets like buildings, and it should be on the non-depreciating assets.
Take a clue from Fred Harrison, who talked to us this past Saturday. What about don't call it a tax? Fred's big thing is we need another term for what we're doing.
I agree with you, Sue. Yeah, it should be called capturing value capture.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
charge for benefits received.
That's right. Good.
Anyone else, or will these will be the four topics?
As far as I've been able to determine, everybody who's ever succeeded has called it a tax. And Steve Cord and I tried those other things and got a bad reaction, so we went back to calling it a tax. You know, so it's mine thing is learning from experience, and I'm going to put one link, and then you have to scroll down to the menus. Williams, Percy, and my own. But Percy Williams did an extensive history of how it was adopted in Pittsburgh, and then my two articles on the difference between Cleveland and Pittsburgh draw a lot from Percy, and then there's some original research in it. But my talking point to the public is that when Pittsburgh adopted land value tax, it had the second highest rents in the country after New York City, in spite of it being smoky and nasty. And that by the 1980s, it was the most affordable city in the United States, and also had the lowest crime rate. So of the 100 largest cities, and we were 40th largest. So anyhow, that's, I mean, I think you just need to give people data and evidence. I think clever word choice doesn't help nearly as much as hard data and evidence does. And I got taught by my city council members and stuff what not to do. You know, everything I wanted to do when I first started out with this was wrong. Appealing to the masses, packing the council chambers, all that kind of stuff. The people who got it through said, no, don't do that, because we've reasoned with them directly, and there's no way to force them to do it. This is an issue where forcing them to do it is just not an option, because the people you're up against, when it's a power struggle, we lose because the landlords have all the power. When you reason it out with them, the landlords sometimes go along with it because they see that ultimately it works well enough that even they benefit.
So Dan, do you want to do a quick one on how Pittsburgh's became the most affordable city? Should I add a card for you?
Sure.
I see someone added a note, how location economics relates to other heterodox economic approaches, as well as the mainstream neoclassical economics. I'd love to see that presented to a political audience. Okay, great. Gavin Kerr, I see you're here. Wouldn't it be great for a quick one on, oh, you just left. Are you here? Great.
There he is.
Awesome. Wow. Just a consideration. You research property owning democracy. Maybe you have a couple minutes on that. That could be cool.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not sure specifically on that topic, but I just added the one you mentioned, this location economics, because it seemed whenever I've, in my kind of research over the last 10 years or so, I've always, and especially in the last couple of years, I've realized that I just keep running up against economics. I want to sort of, when I'm kind of writing a political philosophy article, or I'm trying to, I want to make a point, and I want to say this benefit these people, we should introduce this because, or people who are concerned with social justice should introduce this thing for these reasons. And then I realized that this is kind of contrary to mainstream economic thinking, and even though it's got there are very good economic grounds for making these claims, the grounds themselves are not kind of explicitly recognized by mainstream economists. And so there needs to be some kind of movement in that direction about mainstream economists acknowledging that the relevance of location economics. There have been some movements in recent years in that direction, but only very minor. Sort of, I think there needs to be an effort made to really get some momentum there, and also then heterodox economics like MMT, ecological economics. Probably other like Austrian economics. I know that how does location economics relate to all of these, which I think it does, but this needs to be, I think, really emphasized a lot more than it currently has been. And this would I think then get a much wider, it would generate a broader sort of constituency, in favor of well, LVT I'm calling it, but you could say a tax shift, away from.
Okay, sorry for interrupting you.
Go on.
At this point, we're just introducing the topics, so I think the crowd has an idea. We have one last one. Scott, do you want to talk 30 seconds about your card?
Yeah, I mean, here in New York City, we have a lot of poorly used land, a lot of parking lots, including specific examples that I'm aware of. And if we had a land value tax that would tax those parcels properly, they would get put back into service quickly instead of over years and decades.
Just because I think another thing I found is that I mentioned this the other day in a meeting, but we often find ourselves talking about a major sort of the big picture, how a complete shift in the burden of taxation, get rid of all these taxes, bring in this tax, a single tax or whatever, would have all these enormous benefits. But this is not very effective. And if you're thinking about what to do now, it's like we need to be thinking more about incremental changes. What can a government income government do in the next budget? What, they're not going to just suddenly get rid of all taxes and bring in land value tax. They might reduce VAT by 5%, do this and that, introduce a proportional property tax. So kind of what could we expect a government to do over sort of a 10-year period? How would this benefit people? And then the last bit, we've also got to make sure that we don't disadvantage moderately well off people as well.
Okay, and we have a card. This will be the last one. LVT encourages housing upgrades and new construction. What about affordable housing? Who added that one? Ed, you're up. Talking points.
Okay, well, I think what I believe is that people need to understand the difference between classes of assets, and that land is different. It's not a depreciating asset, and most of us know that story to tell, but I don't think we tell enough the other side of the equation, and that is that buildings every year need expenditures for ongoing maintenance, and about every 10 years there's extraordinary expenditures for systems replacement just to keep the value of the property, its functional utility basically intact. And as a mortgage lender, think about the fact that mortgage lenders would make a 30-year mortgage loan roughly based on the fact that a house will depreciate down to scrap value after 30 years. So you have a 30-year amortizing loan that roughly amortizes at the rate that the house will decline in value, even if fairly well maintained. So that's the starting point. And then just to emphasize the fact that a house should not be taxed as it is currently, the other assets that are also depreciating assets come into that story as well, to basically show that it's ludicrous to think of taxing everyone's assets on their depreciated value. And there's all sorts of complications, as we know, as Ted Gordney will assert, in terms of annual assessment. We don't annually assess housing units to their current replacement value, and that's really the value of a house. It's replacement cost less depreciation. So all these technical aspects to the very basic idea that it makes terrible public policy to burden the basic asset that most people need shelter, and we're going to get obviously less housing constructed when we burden it with annual taxes. So those are the kind of arguments that I've been making in my writing, reaching out to constituencies that aren't familiar with land value taxation and its benefits.
Don't they usually say buildings depreciate 1% per year? Is there a general number?
No, here again, on average, it depends on the level of ongoing maintenance, but even a well-maintained building, particularly in a growth area, will become a tear down after 30 years. So for example, in many suburban communities where you have ranch homes on 1 acre lots, 30 years later, that ranch home, even if it's perfectly livable, is going to be torn down and replaced by a mansion because the land value has increased multiple times, and that existing structure is not the highest best use of the property of the land.
In my limited engagement with my local municipal government, it seems like the kind of the golden standard for local public policy is we should tax everything as low as possible. So spread the burden around, as low as possible so that we don't, make any specific constituency upset.
Of course.
And homeowners are obviously one of the biggest ones. So shifting it on to, and houses are, property tax is normally a huge one. So trying to shift it off of houses seems impossible, but at the same time, they try to get it as low as possible.
Well, as those of us who have been somewhat involved in the Pennsylvania story, and Dan will certainly support this, you know, the argument has been made, do it incrementally. Do it, implement the change slowly but surely, then monitor the results on an annual basis. Has the number of vacant buildings declined? Has the number of new buildings increased? Has the number of building permits for property renovation increased? And so you get the statistics and the data to support that the public policy is working.
Concerning the talking point, you began by saying, you know, by way of example, it's ridiculous to tax other forms of depreciating assets. Can you call to mind any positive examples of it makes much more sense to tax appreciating assets, or does land stand alone?
Well, at the macro level, my view is that this really comes under the topic of rent-seeking benefits of our tax laws with regard to so-called capital gains. And so on a theoretical level, I mean, if you're talking to economists, it maybe work, that there's no such thing as a capital gain. Tangible assets all depreciate over time. And so what we call capital gains are really gains on speculation and passive investment. So, you know, for those reasons, in my writing, I argue that all gains on the sale of assets should be added to ordinary income and subjected to the same tax rates as wages and salaries.
Ed, what about opt-in? The Australian Georgists have been talking about it. I know the British Georgists then it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, I just read the article about the option to opt out of the stamp duty in Australia in favor of a land tax. I haven't really studied that option and what its practical effects would be, but
we could do it. You could extend that. You could say, you know, let's say you want to buy a new property, and you could sign on the dotted line at City Hall, say, from now on, I'll pay a land value tax, but I don't want to pay income taxes anymore. So if your levels of of government could work together, and then from that point on, that property could be permanently a land value tax, and the person who lives there doesn't pay sales tax, income taxes, or business tax.
Yeah, it seems like that requires a lot of coordination between local, state, and federal governments. That's unlikely to occur. So, I mean, that's why I think my view is a progressive income tax with an exemption for a certain amount of income, regardless of source, let's say up to the national median income or the state median income, that all individual income up to that amount could be exempted, all deductions and other exemptions eliminated. And from that point on, you'd have a graduated rate of taxation applied to higher ranges of income. And that would increasingly capture rent-derived income.
I just wanted to mention that all of the certainly most, but possibly all of the Pennsylvania cities that adopted land value tax had falling land values. So they were not appreciating assets at all. And the reason that those cities went for the tax is because they had a crisis where land values were falling because businesses were leaving or people were leaving. So
yeah, the message there, of course, Dan, as we know, is that a lot of times governments only do the right thing after they've done all the wrong things. Yeah.
But that's and my argument about the income tax is that buying an appreciating asset generates no income until the asset is sold. So an income tax, no matter how progressive, encourages people to buy land and sit on it because that generates no income. Or if they invest in something productive, they're going to get dividends constantly, and the productivity is going to generate income tax.
The only other complication that I would add to that discussion is the trend of marking assets to market value. and recording gains or losses in some regular, periodic incidents. And then, so if you have land that's going up and you're recognizing the gain and taking that gain as income, and then the market crashes, and now you're going to get at the after the crash value, you're going to get a giant tax reduction.
We should probably move on. We have 4 more presentations.
I just had a quick, I guess Ed actually answered part of that just now, but Michael Hudson makes the point that repeated depreciation is what makes the real estate investment game so lucrative. In other words, you re-mortgage a property and then you get a repeated depreciation every time you get it remortgaged, so that you get to depreciate all over again. So I don't know how that would work. I guess basically you shouldn't have any depreciation, not even the first time, let alone 10 times, until the building is torn down.
Well, this could get us into a long discussion. There have been some economists who've talked about the fact that owners of an owner-occupied property are recipients of rental income, because if they lease the property out to a third party, they'd be getting this income. And so the fact that they live in a house, they're actually the beneficiary of that income stream and should be taxed. So we could, I think our tax provisions, are, I mean, they're devised by people and supported in the political arena to benefit certain constituencies, and not always for reasons that benefit the public.
Politically well said, Ed.
I vote for progressivity and simplicity. That, to me, and that's why I think a progressive income tax with the provisions that I've indicated, I think is politically saleable.
Right, as Floyd said, we're on to the next topic. So shifting municipal taxes on the land value. Frank?
Yeah, this one, everybody pretty much, I think, on this call understands this thoroughly already. So we should be able to do this really quickly. I guess the idea is obviously that the houses, like Ed said, are depreciating assets. So we should shift the taxes off of that and onto land, which is a gift of nature, the benefit of which should accrue to all citizens. So I mean, it will doing this will make land more expensive to hold and buildings less expensive to maintain and to construct. So it's a win-win. It would cause a rationalization and efficiency curve for urban land and rural land and mining and forestry. All land would be used more efficiently if it was right priced, as they say, and the improvements, which means buildings and mines and what have you, would not be taxed. So if you fix up your house now, you get added tax burden. If you let it depreciate, it gets less tax burden. So this again doesn't have to be all at once. It should be a slow incremental change, and it's a tax shift. It's not a tax grab and not a tax giveaway. With every tax shift, the middle users will not even notice any difference, but the land inefficient people will incur more taxation, and the land efficient people will receive benefit. This will have a dramatic benefit to multi-unit buildings like apartment buildings, which use very little land and have 10, 20, 50, 100 tenants on an amount of land that you could build a house or two on. So it would have a dramatic influence on our urban design and create much more European style walkable communities that won't be so car dependent and be more eyes on the street, less socialization. There's multiple benefits of this kind of quality of life that would improve. The municipal taxes would generally go down because buildings are closer together, so services will not be so expensive to administer, sewers and police and fire, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we all understand that. So I'll just leave it at that, and comments are welcome.
So when I presented to my, again, municipality, I got a meeting with my assistant city manager, and all those kind of, it's more, my area is more of an orthodox area as far as like urban design, and it's a very small city, but you know, a lot of those things weren't necessarily benefits to him. He said like a multifamily unit, you know, they don't necessarily want those because they tend to invite crime. He does, you know, they want to make sure they get the right types of development. They tax, we have a local like a restaurant tax, so they like restaurants, but they don't necessarily like you know, storage buildings or other things that are, that don't provide an income stream to the local city. So, you know, I think a lot of people find a lot of those things to be desirable, but some audiences are certainly not the you know, necessarily inviting to a lot of the things that the land value tax would provide. They want sprawly single family, you know, flat cities, and that's just kind of the way that you know, at least in the United States right now, a lot of cities are trying to hold on to that design framework, unfortunately.
I think right now, one of the challenges that we face with the tax shift is the potential loss of intergenerational wealth transfer. If land prices fall, we're already in the United States anyway, seeing a dramatic increase in the loss of net worth on the part of a lot of senior households because of increased costs of living, and the net worth that people have in their residential property. And that's something I also recommend. Rather than ever talking about housing, I always try to talk about residential property, so that you can then distinguish the housing unit from the land. But anyway, I think that there's a major concern that the equity in a residential property, which is increasingly land value, is a major portion of household net worth, at least in the bottom, maybe 50 or 60% of households in the US. I don't know if it's the same in Canada and any other countries.
Probably.
When I think of that, I think of how we could say that the cash equity of your income and of UBI, if it pays into that, it will be worth more than the loss of home equity. And you're actually trading one form of equity for another that's actually in your pocket and reliable. That case perhaps can be made with more colorful language to really sink in, because it's not a net.
That brings about the marriage of UBI and LVT.
Or even income. If you imagine the income you make in your life and you'll make in your retirement, if it's not taxed, that has a net present value that may be higher than your loss of home equity. So someone has to make that case in simple language, so it's not just seen as a loss.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. In the US again, Floyd, if you look at the cash savings and the investments outside of property value of the majority of households, it's very low. Renters in particular have a net worth of, I think the latest figure I saw was about $7,500. I mean, that's unbelievably low. Whereas owners of an owner-occupied property have an average net worth of well over $100,000.
Yeah. Well, here's a populist example of, if someone pays $12,000 a year less tax over 50 years, the net present value of that is like over $600,000-$700,000 at today's interest rates. Like that's a big gain in wealth. We just don't think of it that way because it's net present value thinking.
Well, and it also goes back to the Milton Friedman talking point about how we've made income and sales tax, you know, low salience taxes. They just get tacked on. We rarely see like the full value. It just happens. We have a withholding system or a tax, sales tax just gets tacked on to your purchase. Whereas, your property tax, you get a thing from the city every year that says this is, what your tax bill is, which is much more, it feels much more real, and you have much closer access to, your local municipal government who sets your tax rates versus the IRS, who, sets your income tax rates, you can't necessarily get to them as directly. So it feels like you have more say in that. And whereas, the other tax forms, you have less, less control over, I guess. But I've thought about doing those things in the past, like in advocacy work. Like, you want to show someone that if you sacrifice a land value tax and give up these other taxes, what is your net gain in your tax? And some of those can be really complex, depending on your local tax rates and everything. So it obviously every municipality will have something different, so it can be really complex for a local advocate to figure out, to appeal to a specific person or a specific city over issues like that.
Gavin's got his hand up. Gavin?
A couple of points. I mean, a question start off with what is actually meant by municipal taxes? My first point. So shifting municipal taxes onto land value. Yeah, what does that include exactly? And
well, I'll just explain. Well, it depends on the jurisdiction. In Canada, I guess in the States too, municipal taxes mean water and sewer and police and fire and the zoning, the municipal politicians, city hall, the libraries, the pools, the parks, all the things that a city provides are paid for out of municipal taxes. Part of the school taxes in many jurisdictions is also paid through municipal taxes. So that's what we're talking about here. It's roughly 1/3 of a person's tax bill. If 1/3 is municipal, 1/3 is federal, 1/3 is provincial or state. So we're only talking about 1/3 of the tax bill would receive this shift. And the more land that, okay, go ahead, continue, Gavin.
But what form would these taxes take? Are we talking is it like local income tax or sales tax or?
No, it's a property tax.
Property tax. Yeah.
It's just exactly a land. Instead of right now, the property tax is half. Well, roughly, partially it's on the building and partially it's on the land beneath the building, right? And so the notion here is simply to shift the tax off of the building and exclusively onto land as a revenue neutral shift. So you're paying, $4,000, say, right now, and it's split between the building and the land. The year after, you'd be paying, if you had an average size house and an average size lot, you'd still be paying exactly the same $4,000, but it would be assessed the value of the land, and the improvements and buildings would be ignored by the taxman.
In the United States, Gavin, if you live in a borough or a city or a town, you will probably get 3 or 4 individual property tax bills. You'll get one from the school district, you'll get one from the township, you'll get one from the county, and you'll get one from the borough, town, or city you live in. Usually the school tax in the United States is the highest. It would represent the largest portion of your property tax obligation.
It's interesting because the comparison with Britain is interesting because our property tax system is so antiquated that it would be a step forward if we kind of introduced a proportional property tax that took account of the value of the property, including the value of the building. That would actually be a step forward, because I was so. But I guess I'm wondering if is it? Well, okay, 2 questions. First of all, I heard a while ago that, or I read somewhere that it's not always the case that when you make this tax shift, that the value of the land or of the property comes down. It can sort of have the effect of stimulating the economy, and then land values go up, which is obviously in some ways a good thing. But it kind of, if you're trying to sell it on the basis that, oh, this is going to solve the housing crisis because it's going to bring prices down, more affordability, but then it does the opposite, then obviously that's a bit of a problem. So I wonder if anybody know kind of did this happen, or what?
Let's do a quick
So
answer
like-
and then move on. We have 3 more talks, including Gavin's.
Yeah,
Ed, do you have an answer to that?
Well, I think Dan answered this question with regard to Pittsburgh, that when land value tax was implemented over time, gradually property prices, housing prices, residential property prices did come down and became much more affordable. And
Hmm.
part of that is certainly the
They
supply
just-
side
that they just didn't go up.
didn't go up.
That's what the difference is, that they went up in the rest of the world and they didn't go up in Pittsburgh. In Australia, they did land value tax abruptly by referendum, where municipalities went from straight property tax to straight land value tax basically overnight. And in those municipalities, land prices fell, but 3 or 4 years later, they were outpacing their neighbors. So what that means is you get an initial drop because speculators start letting go of the properties they aren't using, and that causes a drop. And then the market response is that, you know, building activity increases so much that you're now in a more dynamic municipality, and being in a more dynamic municipality, even with land value tax, causes the property values to go back up. So what my interpretation of that is, if one particular municipality shifts to land value tax, it will probably drop land values in neighboring municipalities, but not necessarily in the municipality that did it, because you're now drawing development away from those other municipalities that still tax buildings.
So it does have an income effect too, Dan, right? I mean, the economic expansion is going to make a much more higher demand for labor, which is going to bring up wages. And so even though the housing prices may not fall, they're more affordable because people are making higher incomes.
Yeah, I mean, the argument for a city council member is it won't drive down the price of your land so much, it will drive down the price of people out in the suburbs where all the development is going now. And but that's only a good argument to the city council members. To state legislators, or to, you know, like, we got the rug pulled out from under us in Pittsburgh by the county. Well, the county, the land speculators who own land in Pittsburgh tend to live in the suburbs. And so they have much more influence at the county level. So there's a lot of strategic political considerations to jump into that. Every situation is different. So we tend to talk about this stuff in a vacuum, but you really have to, like, what does your city councilman care about, or your state legislator care about? It doesn't matter what we care about. It matters what they care about. And we have to come up with answers to their problems, not answers to the problems we think they should be concerned about.
I think we can move on to the next topic, which is how paying rent for land will reduce cost of living. I can see why Floyd wanted to move on.
So the context of this is I'm imagining that I'm speaking to people who are not well versed in these things, and it's more meant to be like a little more populist. It could be some of the claims I make are dots I've connected through my research. I'd definitely like to know if I'm flat out wrong on any of these claims, or which ones may seem novel. So I have it's a 3-minute speech that I've written down that I'll just read out. If we want to bring down the cost of living, we need to reduce the #1 incentive that is driving up the #1 cost that we all face. What is that cost? Rent and mortgage payments. And the #1 incentive that is driving up this cost cost increase is the desire for housing prices to go up. Most of the population wants it to go up, while the other part needs it to come down. What if we all wanted it to come down and stay as low as possible? Land right now is an investment asset, safer than bonds and stocks. The actual house you buy doesn't increase in value over time. It needs upkeep, renovation, modernization to maintain or improve its resale value. The land under it does go up, and it is our desire for land value to go up, treating it as a long-term wealth creation vehicle that drives up bidding behavior, mortgage debts, leading people to spend a painful amount of money just to live. 80% of the rising cost of housing is due to land value increase. So how do we cancel land as an investment asset? We make it more like electricity, utility that you pay for how much you use by paying rent for it. Stocks appreciate on average 6% per year long term, and land appreciates on average 7% per year long term. So 5.5% land rent coming out of that would make land return only 1.5% long term, which would drive all the speculators out to invest in other things, reducing the amount banks are willing to lend, which will dramatically reduce demand that drives up housing costs. Families and property managers will be the #1 customers for which housing would be built, as opposed to people buying second or more homes, which are 90% of the buyers of new construction these days. The money to pay for this rent can come from reducing income taxes and rebating part of the nation's land rent income back to us, so that the vast majority of us come out ahead. My early research shows that the rental value of land in Canada could be used to eliminate all income tax for the first $65,000 of income from work, pensions, and investments, freeing 70% of the population from income tax. And on top of that, we could rebate to every Canadian a $500 a month dividend to help with affordability. This is money we're already spending elsewhere in tax, rent. People already pay landlords a component of that, or mortgage fees already paid to banks. This would also be swapping housing equity for cash equity in terms of the value of these cash flows for the average family and their descendants overall. Meantime, housing would become a lot cheaper, absent the incentives that drive up high bidding, as it has been proven that increasing land rents comes directly out of the upfront purchase value of a home, which would long-term wipe out hundreds of billions of dollars of debt of the over $2 trillion currently owed to Canadian banks, keeping more money in people's pockets to spend in the real economy. There would still be a lot of money to be made in real estate by renovating to sell, modernizing to maintain and increase value, and of course, building new homes and buildings. That is an honest and value-adding work that improves our quality of life, with investment incentives shifting to drive building more units. The housing crisis cannot be fixed without the structural change in incentives. All the political parties are promising to build another 1.5 million units over 10 years. Do we really expect that to make a difference when our incentive structure is designed to drive prices even higher? That's it. And here's a direct link to that write-up, and happy to get feedback.
Yeah, I'll have to read it again thoroughly myself and send you comments as they occur to me.
That's excellent, Floyd. The back of the envelope thinking is that rent is 1/3 of the GDP, and if you compare that, the amount of taxes throughout the whole your every jurisdiction is also 1/3 of the GDP, including like state, municipal, and federal. So the theory is that there's enough rent available to eliminate all taxes. So your analysis, as you say, your preliminary analysis to reduce income taxes or to eliminate income taxes, the first 60%, 68% or something, that's fabulous. You're really on the way here. And what we need to do is document this and put it out in report year after year after year. And anyone who challenges you say, oh, okay, next year you help me come up with the more accurate figures, and you'll come up with the same thing. You're right on the knob, Floyd. I love it.
It reminds me of something I read recently. I'll try to find it for you, but it was talking about developer profits come almost exclusively from land appreciation. So they purchase a lot to develop, and they, are competed down for the improvement to essentially have no economic profit, and essentially just profit on the land appreciation while during the course of the development.
Anyone have any sense of what the breakdown of like Frank, you mentioned, so if rent is 30%, do you have any sense of the breakdown between who's capturing that, like landlords versus banks, for instance? Or another way to put this question is, if the utopian version of shifting all the rent being paid there to replace all existing taxes, who is bearing the majority of the shift?
It looks Looks like Frank jumped off or got disconnected. So if anyone else has another answer or thought.
I think, yeah, I agree that this is a really useful approach. Not just linking back to the previous the comment. There's it sounds really, you know, it's been a very rosy picture, and it is a very rosy picture, but there are going to be losers, aren't there? So don't we need to think about who the losers are going to be? Does this involve, to what extent does this involve redistribution from you know, those who are going to lose out to those who are going to gain? And to the extent that it does involve that, this kind of has to be anticipated and maybe explicitly sort of brought into the selling of it, kind of thing, and make, you know, if you're going down a populist sort of route, you know, so this is going to benefit obviously people who don't own don't have any asset, a property asset. But
the question for you, Gavin, in Britain is, can you get Parliament to give communities autonomy to make their own revenue raising choices? You don't have, my understanding, you don't really have that in Britain. And so you're dependent upon the House of Lords and wealthy members of Parliament to make decisions that are against their own financial interests.
Yeah. They have extended it slightly in the last, very recently, but not, yeah, really not much. So you're right, there's not much scope for local to be done on a sort of county or regional basis. Yeah, it would have to be at the moment done nationally.
I think that's what you know, Fred Harrison is trying to do, is generate public interest to put pressure on members of Parliament.
Yeah,
there are.
Yeah, I agree. That's it.
I wanted to note that there are losers who are your intended losers, and then there are losers who are caught in the middle, and it's the losers who are caught in the middle who are always put forward as the victims of the proposal.
Exactly.
So you have, like, if you go from any tax other than property tax, then retirees end up paying, you know, if you replace wage tax with land value tax, then the retirees are going to get a higher tax, and they don't have any wages anymore. So they are the people who are put forward as the victims of the proposal. And so then it's important to have some kind of, you know, like a per capita dividend to people over 65 would be a, you know, a good way of addressing that. But in Pittsburgh, we just addressed it by going from property tax to land value tax and didn't consider any other taxes. And we specifically looked up the census tracts that had a higher percentage of elderly people. And those census tracts did even better than the census tracts where younger people were living, because the younger people go for the trendy neighborhoods, and the older people are just living wherever they lived in the past. And so they're kind of in the stagnant or declining neighborhoods more often.
Okay, just one point, if I was going to make one more point. It seems to me that what they've done very successfully, certainly in Britain, but I think in America and other places, over the last sort of 50 years or so, is they've got an alliance between the middle classes and the very wealthy, and we need to sort of do it the other way around. That there's get an alliance between the middle and the lower, and kind of is a way of targeting specific groups, like there are, you know, in pensioners, in the elderly population, there are the very well off and there are the sort of not so well off. We need to sort of make this attractive to the not so well off pensioners,
Well,
Yeah.
This is where I believe a progressive income tax is appropriate if you can get the progressivity to be really progressive, because as incomes get into the higher range, the very wealthy are deriving most of that income from passive investment and speculation. And I'm not really too concerned about the professional person who's earning $1 million being taxed at some, high percentage of that income as his income or her income increases, even though it's counter to Henry George's pure idea. They certainly have the ability to pay, and over time, as more rent is collected directly, they will benefit as well, I think.
What about, you've not mentioned the environmental cost or the cost to the agricultural land. And if you go to a rural state such as Indiana, your farmers are going to fight you unless their land has become devalued because of the climate change. And how do you react to that? How do you sell that to the wheat growing provinces of Canada?
Remains for another talk.
The quick answer is that you gather data. Turns out that in Pennsylvania, the majority of farmers pay less. So
there are real agricultural land has a fairly low per acre value, except that it's driven up by the availability of low cost credit that encourages farmers to go into debt to expand their acreage, even as commodity prices might be coming down. So farmers have been in that kind of a conundrum forever. So the particularly young farmers can't afford to purchase land, and so they're leasing land if they're in farming, and they're probably working a part-time job in the town in order to keep their farm going. So I think there are a lot of arguments that can be made to farmers that you're going to be much better off with a land value only tax than the taxes you're now burdened with.
I think some analysis could be done to provide generalized simple statements. We know some research analysis firms that have modeled the population and can probably do this sort of net present value analysis of the two tax regimes. Maybe it's already been done. I had a really quick question, and I know we're going to move on. I made the claim that stocks appreciate by 6% annually long term, and land appreciates, housing generally appreciates by 7% long term. So if we were charging 5.5% land rent, then housing would be a lousy investment on an appreciation basis, only return 1.5% per year. And that would drive a lot of investor types to other more productive things. Is that correct? Like, does it resonate?
Yeah, although land valuing increases are so variable that when a new highway is coming in, buying up the land could increase land values by 200% a year for several years, and so you're not going to stop that, but you can speed up the turnover of the land. The people who buy land near a new highway interchange might say, okay, the land value tax is going to go way up as this value appreciates, so I should start seeking developers now instead of sitting on the land for 10 or 15 years. In the other case, there's some places like Detroit where land values are going down, and the people are just not letting go of the land because they're hoping against hope that the land values will return. And even if they're not, that's why I don't care if the assets are appreciating. What I care about is your city is stagnating because people aren't letting go of that land. So the point of land value tax in Detroit would be to force them to take that loss. If the people, Pittsburgh lost its biggest employer in 1979 and had a huge building boom immediately thereafter, because the people who were sitting on land were willing to let go of it.
Okay. Yeah, that's my claim was, yeah, was more relevant to people seeing it as an investment opportunity, which of course has a variety of conditions.
Yeah, but in general, everybody who has money to invest can, they can say you have $10 million and there are commercial sites that are available for $1 million. And you can buy 10 commercial sites and not do anything with them. Or you can buy one commercial site and put a $9 million factory on it, or anything.
Or you can, or if you're not a builder, you would just buy Tesla stock and forget about housing altogether, which is a good thing, frankly. Get all that lazy money out of the system.
On your precise figures, I'm not qualified or capable of answering your question, but I could sort of forward if it's in the thing that you linked, I could forward that to somebody who I think probably would be capable of doing
this comes from real estate investing books I've read. Generally, rule of thumb is housing appreciates 7% a year. So if you've got a bunch of money you want to invest, the majority of second and third homes are being bought by people who just want to make money. They're not developers. So they might just buy stocks instead, leave more inventory for families. That's the thought. Anyway, Tom, you're up next. LVT encourages housing upgrades and new construction. What about affordable housing?
Okay. Start with my audio. Okay. We all understand that a land value tax will increase housing production. That's been proven, that's been shown, especially in Pennsylvania, with increasing building permits. But will that make housing more affordable? The incentive that comes along with land value taxation is to increase the value of the structure relative to the land. That might result in the production of more luxury housing with larger units, more amenities to increase the building value. On the other hand, our research here in Washington and Oregon has shown consistently that applying a land value tax will benefit the multifamily housing types more than any other land use. That's because the value of the building, of course, is much larger than the value of the land when the building is new. But the question is, again, will the kind of multifamily housing still result in luxury housing units? Or will it be more affordable because you have smaller units or larger numbers of households on a given unit of land? So it's to me, it works both ways, but I'm not sure that we can conclude that a land value tax will automatically produce more affordable housing, even if the production of housing increases, because beyond what the demand is for housing. They're not going to produce an excess supply of housing, which could bring down the price of housing. I'd like to get some comments on that.
Tom, I would say my experience in the housing sector is that if builders can get a construction loan or a loan for site acquisition and development and construction financing, they will build and worry about marketing the units later. because that's what they do. They build, and hopefully their marketing study shows that there's market penetration. But it's up to the banking sector to basically control developers, but they don't do a very good job.
That's true. No, that's right.
I think Dan has talked about this in the past, but you know, a lot of times when you see those luxury developments, a lot of the units sit empty because the owners can rely on the appreciation of the land to make up for not filling those units. But with the land value tax, at least the full tax on the full rental value, they would be encouraged, if not forced, to have someone in every unit. Which means they would have to build units for people who could afford them.
And that ties into. Yeah, go ahead.
What I most commonly tell people is that I drive a 20-year-old Buick, and my Buick is a luxury car. My Buick is not a car that I could even begin to afford new, but I would rather drive an old Buick than a new Yugo. And that, when you build affordable housing, you're either taxing market rate housing, so you're, in order to do it, which means you're decreasing the total supply of housing, or you're building very cheap housing. And, I look at where I've lived in my life, and I've always lived in old houses that had been luxury accommodations when they were new. And so as soon as you stop the supply of new housing, you stop the migration of rich people out of those old houses into the new houses, which means that poorer people like me can no longer move into those poor houses or those old houses. So,
you can't move into it either if it's a trendy neighborhood and it becomes gentrified.
Well, I don't have to live in a trendy neighborhood. I mean, I'm not, people say you have roots in the community. Yeah, metaphorically, but I'm not a tree, and I can be transplanted somewhere else. And my old friends from the old community, we can still communicate, especially these days I can communicate with Australians, so I don't buy the victim of, the neighborhood became trendy. It turns out that fewer people move out of appreciating neighborhoods than move out of declining neighborhoods. And even fewer people move out of appreciating neighborhoods than move out of stagnant neighborhoods, because anybody who owns their house will not move out of an appreciating neighborhood. But the renters, the victims of gentrification are the renters. People try to tell you homeowners, the victims of gentrification, they're just lying to you, because their house value is going up by far more than their taxes increase.
Yes, but do we want the poor residents to be moving out of gentrified neighborhoods? That's displacement, and that is being vociferously fought here in Portland by the city policies. They're trying to maintain the lower income residents in the neighborhoods in which they grew up, which are the gentrifying neighborhoods.
Well, land value tax gives you less displacement. It gives you more gentrification. A gentrification is drawing richer people in, and displacement is pushing poorer people out. And usually you get major displacement when there's a government project that bulldozes an entire neighborhood and builds luxury housing for lots of people at once. And land value tax doesn't do that. They say, the land value tax just says this vacant house is going to be losing money, and there's nobody to displace in it because it's vacant, and you are going to build in it because you can't afford to sit on it any longer. And it says you might tear down these 5 single-family homes and build a 200-unit apartment building. Well, you've displaced five families, and you've brought in 200. You know, so you get maximum gentrification with minimum displacement. And that's what everybody wants. Even the poor people, they don't mind having rich neighbors who spend money.
Lloyd had a
Yeah,
question.
that's true.
Just had a comment on affordable housing. This ties back into my this investor thesis numbers I raised. There's some research showing that 90% of new development in some of the major cities in Toronto are being bought by investors. In other words, people who just want to rent them out. So these homes are being designed for the tastes of investors and who think they can rent it to a specific clientele. Well, if they're only making 1.5% per year on this asset, they just buy stocks instead. These developers would be developing things for families to their tastes and their needs. So it just seems intuitive to me, without any research, that would address affordable housing. Because neighborhoods that are middle or low income, they might be building more stuff to cater to middle or low income people in those neighborhoods, because those are the buyers and not a bunch of investors who live outside of the city and have a lot of money to spend.
Investors want a diversified portfolio so that if one market is up and another market is down, they're still looking for an average rate of return that's beating the markets overall. So, I mean, like BlackRock and some of these others, their overall investment portfolios probably include gold, Bitcoin, S&P 500, over-the-counter derivatives. Who knows? I mean, everything.
Well, I'm just saying that housing would become more boring than bonds, and bonds are the least risky investment instrument, and that's a good thing.
If you own a residential property or a building, you get the benefits of depreciation expense, and you might even, if you agree to accept Section 8 vouchers, or you agree to limit rental charges for some portion of the units to based on household income, you might get other specific tax benefits like a low income tax credit in the United States. So, I mean, this is a very complex issue that involves a lot of accountants. And so, you know, this is where the story goes. It goes to the tax accountants and what they're advising investors to do to match return with risk.
I just wanted to say, in Pittsburgh and McKeesport and any city we've studied that had multiple wards, it was always the richest wards that that got a tax increase. So the homeowners in Oakland, Shadyside, and Squirrel Hill are the three richest residential wards in Pittsburgh. They actually got a tax increase, but there's 32 wards altogether. The first two are the downtown wards, but that leaves 30 wards. 27 out of those 30 wards got tax decreases, and they were the poorest 27. And then the richest 3 got tax increases because the land is extremely valuable in rich neighborhoods. So, and 1/4 of the total tax burden in the city of Pittsburgh was paid by the Golden Triangle, which is when you watch a football game and they take a picture of the city of Pittsburgh, the Golden Triangle is where all the skyscrapers are. And they paid a 1/4 of the total taxes. They were 1% of the area and 25% of the tax burden. So it was a massive shift to commercial property and to the richest neighborhoods. So poor people, if the rest of the city starts to improve, poor people, there will probably just be fewer poor people, because the poor people also have the option of accepting the increased jobs that flow in. And I mean, they have to get an education, and they have to do various other things, but you're making the climate much better for poorer people, and you're lowering their taxes in those poor neighborhoods.
All right, let's give Tom a closing word on this topic, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying. I would certainly prefer a land value tax over the existing tax, but I'd also add this. I think that Portland actually Washington and Oregon have made the change to the zoning codes to eliminate exclusive single-family housing. You probably are aware of that. And I think this is going to be an enormous help because it opens up the city to multiple family units, which are for the most part acceptable because they're fairly low density, but it's widespread and it's not likely to trigger off large increases in land values around the city. Just won't happen. And it also, the new zoning code prohibits the reconstruction of single family housing over 1,500 square feet. 1,500 square feet is the limit.
Really?
So it's going to help. I think the new zoning code is going to help. And I think if we promoted that elimination of single family housing along with LVT, I think we'd go a long way.
All right. Next topic is how location economics relates to other heterodox economic approaches, as well as mainstream neoclassical economics.
And I think
Gavin.
that's the last one.
Yes.
And yeah.
Okay, so I suppose this is kind of relates to the key, the central theme a little bit indirectly, but I think in order to come up with simple language, sell LVT using simple language, you kind of have to, first of all, to make the case, you've got to use economics in some way or another. And I guess what I'm thinking here is in the last few years, or maybe, I don't know, is it sort of 5 to 10 years, you're all probably familiar with the rethinking economics movement. So students are getting active, are realizing that what they're being taught is kind of, not necessarily all that it could be. And so there's a lot of emphasis put on heterodox approaches of various kinds. And I think it's like, it seems to me the most ones that people talk about most are sort of MMT or post-Keynesian, in general approaches, Marxist economics, ecological economics, that kind of thing. And I think to broaden the base of support for LVT or whatever you want to call it, land tax shift, we could sort of emphasize a bit more the macroeconomic aspects of like how would LVT protect against inflation, for example. That's very topical at the moment. Or why might we think, or should we think that it's an important kind of anti-inflationary kind of measure, and therefore, for sustainable growth. There's a lot of talk in economics about incentives, and obviously rightly so, but in location economics is kind of what often gets missed out is the effect of taxation in marginal areas. So all over the world there are regional divides. Like in Europe, in Germany, where I am at the moment, it's the east and the west, and the north and the south is, they're different countries. In Britain, it's like London is one country, the rest of the UK is another country. In America, it's the coasts, and then you've got so regional divides. And I think location economics explains why these divides exist better than any the other approaches. And obviously contemporary inequality. What had Piketty and his with the published in 2014, documenting the extent of the growth of inequality over the last sort of half a century. But the grounding of that, or the root cause in I think rising land values basically was not, he didn't really recognize that. And other people have sort of recognized that a bit more, but that I think more could be made of that.
Joe
so
Stiglitz,
there could be, yeah.
Joe Stiglitz beat him up over that.
Yeah, yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, but yeah, I think we could go into that quite a lot more. So in general, I think there's a great opportunity to sort of present location economics as a kind of to new students who are dissatisfied with the mainstream economics in the way that other heterodox approaches are currently being presented, like MMT, post-Keynesianism, environmental economics, Marxist economics. I don't really see in the rethink economics discussions. There's not really been any. It's not really on the radar yet. Location economics. So, or I mean, I'm calling it location economics for want of a better term, but sort of maybe land rent economics, or I don't know what you would call it. So that's what I think could be a good way of then making more people aware of the sort of things that Floyd was talking about in his presentation. Why it is the case that a land value-based tax shift would make life more affordable.
Well, we need more university professors to teach the subject. The question is how to get them to understand the subject and then be able to teach it. We only have within the Georgist community a handful of academics who hold positions in universities. And so there's no school of land economics professors the way there's a school of Austrians and Marxists and Keynesians and supply siders, etc. So I don't, most of us are, I mean, I've been teaching political economy at the Henry George School for decades, but we, only every now and then get some attention from the academic community. I don't know. It'd be great to get young people to major in economics and major in economics with an attitude that that neoclassical economics doesn't work. And so I'm going to study to find out what does work and then seek us out. I don't know, Gavin, I don't know what the answer is, but it's a tough issue for us to, we don't get invited very often to economics conferences, although some of us have spoken in the United States at the Eastern Economic Association conference that's held usually in New York. You get some attendance there, but I don't know that we've really affected the thinking of any of the young economics students who come. Maybe a few.
It seems like we do have very little political capital in the academic realm, but I think, in the past couple of weeks, some of us, that there's a podcast that one of the young Georgists runs, and he's had the chief financial advisor of Redfin. I don't know if you've seen that go around, Daryl Fairweather. She endorsed a land value tax, and then Vitalik Buterin, who is the founder, who created Ethereum, which is one of the big cryptocurrencies, he endorsed land value tax. So it's definitely gaining some more, mainstream acceptance in the kind of, tastemaker realm, if you will. But as far as like academic, I think and it's frustrating because, Dan mentioned Joseph Stiglitz. Like, there are academics who, know it's effective, but they just, they won't put a lot of their, credentials on the line to really stake for it, unfortunately.
Gavin, is what you were saying that the this school of thought needs to have its own kind of encompassing economic theory, or that it needs to do a better job of cross-pollinating with these other things like MMT and stuff?
Well, I think I was saying the latter, but there could be, maybe there would be something to be said for the former as well. But I think that sort of exists already. But yeah, I guess it was more the latter, what I was saying, yeah. I mean, so just coming back to Ed, yeah, there is the problem of not many academics on board, but there are people kind of involved with in the rethinking economics movement who kind of we could, communicate with directly. That would be just one way. I say we, I mean somebody who's capable of presenting the location economics in a concise kind of form.
Fred Foldvari wrote a great economics text that merges Austrian theory with Georgist, land theory. I don't know, how many people have ever read it, but it's certainly worth reading and having as a desk reference.
The cross-pollination might lie in the fact that the location economics offers a much more of a incrementalist and near-term solutions to some of the things that a lot of the other grander theories require more all or nothing, more revolutionary approaches to be effective.
I mentioned Phil Anderson's work in Australia. Phil has if you don't know him, you should Google him and find his work. He has established an investment advisory service based on his analysis of how markets actually work, and including land markets as well as the stock market. And so he's built up a successful advisory business by being able to more accurately forecast the economy and where it's going than other forecasters. It seems to me that our small community, if it had the resources, would expand our economic forecasting capability so that we could compete in the macroeconomic arena with central banks, World Bank, and all those others, because I think our insights do help us forecast what's coming. And I'm one of the people who think that the next economic downturn is going to be as forecasted in 2026. And I'm getting ready to deliver a series of lectures on this in August for the Henry George School. Now, I'll only reach 25, 30, maybe 40 people at a time with this, but I think it's the kind of analysis that we also need. We need the kind of things that Dan has done all of his, decades, and other people have done, hammering on the doors of local governments and politicians. But I think macroeconomic analysis gets us into the big game with the others who are competing for resources and government attention.
All right, everyone. Well, I think we have gone through a number of the talks. I hope this was of some value for sharing talking points.
What's your assessment, Floyd?
Yeah, I found it very informative, very exciting, and exciting. I'm still learning, so it's all exciting for me now. And the diversity of possible outcomes scares me a bit personally. It makes it more difficult to make simple, sweeping talking points that politicians like to make or marketers like to use. which is a little problematic. So definitely want to go deeper on these and assess what can be really marketed in a populist way, given all the data. Yeah, I don't think George stops to review all these outcomes. He just created a movement with dialectic common sense statements.
He was, I believe, somewhat over optimistic that he had started the ball rolling, and that the ball would roll in the right direction even without his leadership. But unfortunately, the opposing powers and opposing the way political economy was being replaced by economics. And that story in itself is a really important, interesting story that young economics students need to learn and study. How their discipline became dominated by basically, the neoclassical approach, and what was lost because of it.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Justin, for that paper. All right, everyone. Well, I got to go, but you're all welcome to stay and chat.
This was fun.